I thought stargazing would help me escape my confusion. Instead, lying on that blanket under the desert sky with him beside me, I realized I'd been looking at the wrong constellations my entire life. Everything I thought I understood about myself was about to shift, and the man next to me had no idea he was about to become the center of my universe. If you've ever discovered something unexpected about yourself, please like and subscribe for more true stories. My name is George Kincaid, and I'd been living in Albuquerque for 3 years before I finally admitted I was lonely. I worked as a senior hydrographic surveyor for a regional water resources firm, spending most of my days analyzing elevation data and mapping floodplains across central New Mexico. The work was solitary, but satisfying, the kind of career that let me disappear into spreadsheets and topographic models without having to explain myself to anyone. I'd moved here from Seattle after my relationship with my college girlfriend ended. We'd been together for 6 years, and when she told me she wanted to get married, I panicked in a way I couldn't explain. I told her I needed time. She told me she'd already given me enough. So I left. Not because I didn't care about her, but because something inside me felt fundamentally wrong, and I didn't know how to name it. Albuquerque gave me space. The high desert light, the sprawling mesas, the way the Sandia Mountains turned pink at sunset, it all felt like permission to start over without anyone watching. I rented a small casita in the Nob Hill neighborhood, near the university, and I built a quiet life that didn't demand too much from me. But by the spring of last year, that quiet had started to feel like isolation. I'd been scrolling through a community board at my favorite coffee shop one afternoon when I saw a flyer for an amateur astronomy group. They met twice a month at the Petroglyph National Monument for stargazing sessions, and beginners were welcome. I'd always liked the idea of astronomy, though I'd never pursued it seriously. Something about the flyer appealed to me. Maybe it was the promise of human contact that didn't require me to explain my past. Maybe it was just an excuse to get out of my apartment. I showed up the following Saturday evening, carrying a folding chair and a thermos of coffee, feeling awkward and out of place. There were about 15 people gathered near the monument's West Mesa overlook, setting up telescopes and blankets as the sun sank below the horizon. Most of them seemed to know each other, chatting easily while they adjusted tripods and compared star charts. I stood at the edge of the group, wondering if I'd made a mistake. First time, I turned and found myself looking at a man about my age, maybe a year or two older. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, warm brown eyes, and an easy smile that made me feel less invisible. That obvious? I asked. Only because I haven't seen you before, he said. I'm Matt as Gallardo. I help run these sessions. George Kincaid, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and I felt something unexpected flicker in my chest. Good to meet you, George, he said. You bring any equipment? Or are you just here to look? Just to look, I admitted. I don't really know what I'm doing. That's the best way to start, Mattis said. Come on, I'll show you around. He led me through the group, introducing me to a few of the regulars, and explaining the basics of what we'd be observing that night. He worked as a renewable energy consultant, he told me, analyzing solar farm feasibility across the Southwest. His job required a lot of travel, but he tried to make it back to Albuquerque for these gatherings whenever he could. There's something grounding about it, he said, as we walked toward his telescope setup. Spending all day thinking about energy projections and infrastructure, and then coming out here and realizing how small all of it is. I understood what he meant. There was a humility to standing under the desert sky, watching the stars emerge one by one as the light faded. Matt had brought a refractor telescope, and he spent the next hour showing me how to locate Jupiter and Saturn, how to adjust the focus to see the rings and moons. He was patient and enthusiastic, pointing out constellations and explaining their mythology with the kind of passion that made me want to keep listening. I found myself watching him as much as I watched the sky. There was something about the way he moved, the way he spoke, that made me feel awake in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't attraction, I told myself. It was just admiration. He was interesting, that was all. But when the session ended and people started packing up, I felt a strange reluctance to leave. You coming back next time? Matt asked as he collapsed his tripod. Yeah, I said. I think I will. Good, he said, and his smile made my chest tighten again. I drove home that night feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't name. I kept replaying the evening in my mind, trying to pinpoint what had shifted. I'd enjoyed the stargazing. I'd enjoyed the group. But what I kept coming back to was Mattis's voice. His hands adjusting the telescope. The way he'd looked at me when he smiled. I told myself it didn't mean anything. Over the next few weeks, I became a regular at the astronomy group. I bought my own beginner telescope and started learning the constellations on my own. But mostly, I went because I wanted to see Mattis. We started arriving early and staying late, talking long after the others had left. He told me about his work, about the challenge of convincing rural communities to invest in solar infrastructure when they'd been promised jobs in oil and gas for generations. I told him about hydrographic surveying, about the strange satisfaction of turning raw elevation data into maps that could predict floods and save lives. We talked about our families. He'd grown up in Santa Fe, the youngest of 4 siblings, and his parents still ran a small construction business near the plaza. I told him about growing up in Tacoma, about my older sister who lived in Portland and worked in tech, about my parents who'd retired to Arizona and kept asking when I was going to settle down. I didn't tell him about my ex-girlfriend. I didn't tell him why I'd left Seattle, but I found myself thinking about him constantly. I'd be in the middle of analyzing a drainage basin or reviewing a survey report, and my mind would drift to the way Matt laughed. The way his voice softened when he talked about something he cared about. It scared me. I'd never felt this way about a man before. I'd never felt this way about anyone. Really, not even my ex, if I was being honest. With her, it had always felt like I was playing a role, trying to fit into a shape that other people expected of me. With Mattis, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I was finally paying attention. One evening in late April, after the group had dispersed, Mattis and I were sitting on the tailgate of his truck, looking out over the darkened mesa. I've been thinking about doing a solo trip, he said, out to the Bisty Badlands. It's a dark sky area, no light pollution at all. I've been wanting to photograph the Milky Way there for a while now. That sounds incredible, I said. He glanced at me. You want to come? My heart kicked. Seriously? Yeah, he said. I mean, it's a long drive, and we'd have to camp overnight. But if you're up for it, I'd like the company. I should have hesitated. I should have come up with an excuse, a reason to say no. But instead, I heard myself say, when do we leave? Next weekend, he said, and his grin was so open, so unguarded, that I felt something crack inside me. I spent the next week preparing for the trip, buying camping gear I didn't own and researching the Bisty Badlands online. It was a remote stretch of desert in northwestern New Mexico, known for its otherworldly rock formations and near total absence of artificial light. I told myself this was just a camping trip. 2 friends stargazing in the desert. Nothing more, but I couldn't ignore the way my pulse quickened every time I thought about it. We left early on a Saturday morning, driving north out of Albuquerque in Matt his truck. The landscape shifted as we climbed toward Farmington, the high desert giving way to mesas and arroyos striped with red and white stone. Matt had brought a playlist of folk and indie rock, and we sang along badly to half the songs, laughing at each other's off-key harmonies. It felt easy, natural, like we'd been doing this for years. By the time we reached the trailhead near the Bisty Wilderness, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. We hiked in with our packs, navigating the surreal landscape of hoodoos and balanced rocks, until we found a flat area sheltered by a low ridge. Matt set up his camera equipment while I assembled the tent. The silence out here was profound, broken only by the occasional gust of wind and the distant cry of a raven. When the sky darkened, we spread out a blanket and lay side by side, staring up at the stars. I'd seen plenty of night skies since moving to New Mexico, but this was different. Out here, with no city glow, no passing cars, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. I could see the dust lanes, the clusters, the faint glow of distant galaxies. God, I whispered. I know, as said quietly. We didn't talk for a long time. We just lay there, breathing in the cool desert air, watching the stars slowly wheel overhead. And then, without thinking, I said, Matt, yeah, I don't think I've ever felt this. I trailed off, unsure how to finish. He turned his head to look at me. Felt what? I met his eyes, and in that moment, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. Not to him, not to myself. I don't think I've ever felt this way about anyone, I said, my voice barely audible. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Matt didn't move. He just kept looking at me, his expression unreadable in the starlight. George, he said finally, and there was something careful in his voice. What are you saying? I sat up, my heart hammering. I don't know. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying to steady myself. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. No, Iz said, sitting up beside me. Don't apologize. Just talk to me. I lowered my hands and looked at him. He was watching me with concern, not judgment, and that made it harder. I've never done this before, I said. I've never felt like this about a guy. I didn't even think I could. But then I met you, and I don't know how to make sense of it. He was quiet for a moment, and I braced myself for rejection. But then he said, George, I blinked. You are? Yeah, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I figured you knew. Didn't, I said, feeling stupid. I didn't know. Okay, he said gently. So now you do. I stared at him, my mind racing. I don't know what I am, I admitted. I had a girlfriend for 6 years. I thought I loved her, but I never felt with her what I feel when I'm with you. Matt reached out and put a hand on my shoulder. That's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. But what if I'm wrong? I said. What if I'm just confused? Then we figure it out, he said. But George, you need to understand something. I like you. I've liked you since the first time we met. But I'm not going to push you into anything you're not ready for. I looked at him, and something in his steady gaze made me feel less afraid. I don't want to hurt you, I said. I know, he said. And I'm choosing to take that risk. He leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away. And when his lips met mine, it was the gentlest, most deliberate kiss I'd ever experienced. It felt like coming home. We stayed out there under the stars for hours, talking and kissing and trying to make sense of what was happening between us. Matt has told me about his own journey, about coming out in college and navigating his family's expectations, about the relationships he'd had and the heartbreaks he'd survived. I told him about my ex, about the guilt I felt for leaving her without a real explanation, about the years I'd spent trying to convince myself I was someone I wasn't. You're allowed to change your mind about who you thought you were, Matt said. That's not a betrayal. That's just being honest. I wanted to believe him. By the time we finally crawled into the tent, the sky was starting to lighten. We lay facing each other in our sleeping bags, and Matt reached out to brush a strand of hair from my forehead. You okay? He asked. I think so, I said. Good, he said. And he kissed me again before closing his eyes. I lay awake for a long time, listening to his breathing, trying to process everything that had just happened. I was terrified, but I was also more certain than I'd ever been that this was real. When we drove back to Albuquerque the next day, felt like a different person. The landscape looked the same, but everything inside me had shifted. Matt dropped me off at my casita, and before I got out of the truck, he took my hand. We don't have to rush this, he said. We can take it as slow as you need. Okay, I said. But I want to see you again, he said. Soon. Me too, I said, and I meant it. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Matt would come over after work, and we'd cook dinner together or walk through the neighborhoods near Old Town, talking about everything and nothing. We went to movies and art galleries and hiking trails, and slowly, I started to let myself believe that this was allowed. I came out to my sister first. We were on a video call one evening, and she was telling me about a work project when I interrupted her. I'm seeing someone, I said. She paused, surprised. That's great, George. What's her name? His name is Matt, I said, and my voice didn't shake. There was a beat of silence, and then she smiled. Okay, tell me about him. I told her everything, and she listened without judgment, asking questions and offering support in a way that made me feel less alone. My parents were harder. I called them a week later, and when I told them, my mother went quiet. Are you sure? She asked finally. Yes, I said. But you were with Emma for so long, she said. I just don't understand. I know, I said. I'm still figuring it out too. But this is real, Mom. She didn't say she accepted it, but she didn't say she didn't either. My father mostly stayed silent, and when we hung up, I felt exhausted but relieved. Matt has held me that night, and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't in years. They'll come around, he said, and if they don't, you still have people who love you. I knew he was right. By June, Mattaz and I were spending almost every evening together. I met his family at a backyard barbecue in Santa Fe, and they welcomed me with warmth and curiosity, asking about my work and teasing Matt as in a way that made me feel included. His mother pulled me aside at one point and said, "He's been happier since he met you." I think I'm happier too, I said. She smiled. Good. That's all that matters. But even as things deepened between us, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was waiting for something to go wrong. I'd spent so long hiding from myself. That vulnerability felt dangerous. There were nights when I'd wake up in a panic, convinced that I'd made a mistake, that I was fooling myself, that this couldn't last. Matt, as was patient, he never pushed me to move faster than I was ready for, and he never made me feel broken for struggling. This is new for you, he said one night when I tried to apologize for pulling away during an argument. You're allowed to be scared. Just don't shut me out. I'm trying, I said. I know, he said, and I'm not going anywhere. That summer, we took a week off and drove up to Colorado, camping in the San Juan Mountains and spending our days hiking through aspen groves and our nights lying under the stars. It was the first real vacation I'd taken in years, and being away from Albuquerque, away from the weight of my old life, made everything feel lighter. One evening, we were sitting by a campfire near Lake City when Mattis said, "I love you." I froze, my heart racing. You don't have to say it back, he added quickly. I just wanted you to know. I looked at him across the firelight, at the way the flames reflected in his eyes, and I realized I'd been afraid of these words for no reason. I love you too, I said, and it was the easiest truth I'd ever spoken. He smiled, and I leaned across the fire to kiss him, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely whole. But when we got back to Albuquerque, reality reasserted itself in ways I wasn't prepared for. I ran into my ex-girlfriend at a grocery store in Nob Hill one Saturday afternoon. I'd been avoiding places I thought she might be, but there she was, standing in the produce section. And when she saw me, her expression hardened. "George," she said. "Emma," I said, my stomach dropping. Hi, she said, and there was no warmth in her voice. We stood there awkwardly for a moment, and then she said, "I heard you're with someone." I didn't know how to respond. "Yeah," I said. "Finally, a guy," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. She laughed. "But it was bitter. So that's why you left. You couldn't figure out you were gay while you were with me?" "Emma, I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." "That doesn't make it hurt less," she said, and her voice cracked. "I spent 6 years with you, George. I thought we were building a life. And now I find out you were just, what? Using me to figure yourself out?" "No," I said. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" she asked, and there were tears in her eyes now. I didn't have an answer that would make it better. "I cared about you," I said. "I did. I just didn't understand myself." "That's not good enough," she said, and she walked away before I could say anything else. I stood there in the middle of the grocery store, feeling like the worst person alive. When I told Matt about it later, he held me and said, "You can't undo the past. All you can do is be honest now." "She hates me," I said. "She's hurt," he said, "and she has a right to be, but that doesn't mean you were wrong to leave." I wanted to believe him, but the guilt sat heavy in my chest for weeks. By the fall, Matt and I had been together for almost 6 months. We'd started talking about the future, about moving in together, about what it would look like to build a life as a couple in Albuquerque. I was still figuring out what it meant to be a gay man in my 30s, still navigating the awkwardness of coming out to coworkers and old friends. But I was doing it with Matt as beside me, and that made it bearable. One evening in October, we drove back out to the Petroglyph National Monument for another astronomy gathering. It was the first time we'd been back since that initial night we met, and as we set up our equipment, I felt a wave of gratitude for how much had changed. "You remember the first time you came here?" Matt asked, adjusting his telescope. "Yeah," I said. "I had no idea what I was doing." "You still don't," he teased, and I laughed. "Fair," I said. "But at least now I have you to help." He smiled and kissed me, and I felt the warmth of it spread through my chest. Later, as the group dispersed and we packed up our gear, Nez said, "I've been thinking about something." "What?" I asked. "I want to take you on another trip," he said. "Somewhere really dark. Maybe Big Bend or Utah. Somewhere we can see the stars the way we did in Bisty." "Love that," I said. "Good," he said. "Because I'm not done exploring the universe with you." I looked at him, this man who'd helped me find myself, and I realized that I wasn't done either. We planned the trip for early December, when the winter skies would be clearest. Matt chose a remote area in southern Utah near Natural Bridges National Monument, which had been designated an International Dark Sky Park. I took a week off work, and we loaded up his truck with camping gear, camera equipment, and enough food to last us several days off the grid. The drive north was long but beautiful, the landscape shifting from high desert to red rock canyons as we crossed into Utah. We stopped in Blanding to stock up on supplies, then continued deeper into the backcountry, following dirt roads that wound through cedar forests and sandstone formations. By the time we reached our campsite, the sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and pink. We set up the tent quickly, working together with the easy efficiency of two people who'd done this before. And then we started a fire and cooked dinner as the stars began to appear. "God, I missed this," Matt said, leaning back against a rock and staring up at the sky. "We were just here in Bisty a few months ago." I said. "I know," he said, "but it never gets old." I sat beside him, and he wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. We stayed up late that night, watching the Milky Way arc across the sky, and Matt took long exposure photographs while I dozed on and off, lulled by the crackling fire and the sound of his quiet movements. The next morning, we hiked out to see the Natural Bridges' massive stone arches carved by ancient rivers and spent the afternoon exploring the canyon. It was cold, but the air was clear and still, and the solitude felt sacred. That evening, as we ate dinner by the fire, Matt said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving your old life behind?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I regret how I did it. I regret hurting Emma, but I don't regret being here now." He nodded slowly. "I just want to make sure you're happy." "I am," I said. "Matt I'm happier than I've ever been." He smiled, and I saw relief in his eyes. "I've been thinking about something," I said. "About what comes next." "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean us," I said. "I want to move in together. I want to build something permanent with you." He looked at me, his expression softening. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "I've never been more sure of anything." He leaned across the fire and kissed me, and I felt the last of my fear dissolve. "Then let's do it," he said. "Let's find a place together." We spent the rest of the trip planning our future, talking about neighborhoods we liked, about what kind of space we needed, about how we'd merge our lives in practical, tangible ways. It felt real in a way that nothing in my old life ever had. When we got back to Albuquerque, we started looking at rentals. We found a small house in the Ridgecrest neighborhood near the foothills, with a backyard big enough for a garden and a clear view of the Sandias. We moved in together in January, and it was messy and chaotic and perfect. We spent weekends painting walls and assembling furniture, arguing over where to hang pictures, and laughing at how little either of us knew about interior design. My parents came to visit in February. It was the first time they'd seen me since I'd come out, and I was nervous about how they'd react to Matt. But when they arrived, my mother hugged him and said, "It's nice to finally meet you." My father shook his hand and said, "George speaks highly of you." It wasn't a grand acceptance, but it was a start. We had dinner together that night, and Matt has charmed them with stories about his work and his family, and by the end of the evening, my mother was laughing at his jokes, and my father was asking him about solar energy policy. When they left, my mother hugged me and said, "He's good for you." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "It's okay," I said. "We're here now." By spring, Matt and I had settled into a rhythm. We both worked long hours, but we made time for each other, cooking dinner together most nights, hiking on weekends, hosting friends for barbecues in our backyard. I rejoined the astronomy group, and this time, Matt and I went together as a couple. Some of the regulars had known about us for months, but others were surprised, and a few were quietly uncomfortable, but most people were kind, and the ones who weren't didn't matter. One evening in April, almost exactly a year after our first trip to Bisti, Matt and I drove back out to the Badlands. We hiked in at sunset, retracing the path we'd taken that first time, and when we reached the same sheltered spot where we'd camped, we spread out a blanket and lay down under the stars. "This is where it started," Matt said quietly. "Yeah," I said. "This is where I finally let myself see it." He turned to look at me. "Do you remember what you said that night?" I said I'd never felt this way about anyone, I said. "And do you still feel that way?" he asked. "More than ever," I said. He smiled and kissed me, and we lay there together, watching the Milky Way stretch across the sky. The same stars we'd seen a year ago, the same universe, but everything was different now. I thought about the person I'd been when I first moved to Albuquerque, lost, hiding, afraid to name what I wanted. I thought about the person I was now, still learning, still growing, but no longer alone. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" Matt asked. "For seeing me," I said. "For being patient. For not giving up." "I'd do it all again," he said. "Every second." We stayed out there until dawn, and when the first light touched the horizon, we packed up and hiked back to the truck. As we drove home, the desert landscape glowing in the morning sun, I reached over and took Matt as his hand. "I love you," I said. "I love you too," he said,